Good evening and welcome to Solidarity on Tap. My name is Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and on behalf of everyone at ISN, as well as our national Solidarity on Tap sponsors, Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, Mary Knoll Lay Missioners, and the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, and the Center for Global Education and Experience at Augsburg University, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're so glad to have you. For over 15 years, the Ignatian has been uniting the Ignatian family, meaning the Jesuit network, as well as all those who are inspired to work for justice through the spiritual tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, to build a more just world through transformational programs and resources that deepen faith and lead to dismantling systematic injustice, as well as collaborative initiatives that bridge divides and overcome exclusion, and collective action to defend and promote the inherent dignity of all God's creation, both people and planet. If you haven't already, please make sure to check out our website, ignatiansolidarity.net, and like and follow us on social media to get the latest advocacy alerts, educational resources, and much more. Now, many of you who've joined us before know this, but for those who are just joining for the first time, let me give you the background on Solidarity on Tap, okay? This isn't exactly how we would like to be doing this, okay? In a pre-COVID reality, Solidarity on Tap usually took place in cities across the country, bringing together members of the Ignatian family in local bars and pubs to put the social in social justice. Powerful speakers address crowds of people from throughout the Ignatian network in their local community. But like many things, we moved virtual in late March 2020, and here we are a year later, and we're still doing this. But it's been a lot of fun, and we're happy to have you tonight. So even though we're gathering virtually, the goal of Solidarity on Tap is the same: to invite people to enjoy fellowship, maybe with a drink in hand, and to hear powerful reflections from members of the network engaged in work for justice. And as always, in order to build and enjoy community tonight, I encourage you, I implore you to utilize the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, or post to Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag ISNLive to let us know you and your institution are represented here tonight. Okay. You can also post your comments and questions for our guest speaker this evening as well. All right. Twitter, Facebook, let us know what's going on. YouTube, even if you're on YouTube tonight, let us know there. Okay. Now, Solidarity on Tap conversations are typically a carefully curated recipe of serious conversation filled with opportunities to learn and grow in both heart and mind, sprinkled with some moments of humor and always carried out with a vision of a hope-filled future. So with this in mind, I'm very excited to introduce our guest tonight, Mary Wardell-Ghirarduzzi. Dr. Mary Wardell-Ghirarduzzi brings a passion for creating a more equitable, inclusive, and caring campus climate and culture for all. She is an executive leader skilled at building organizational capacity through strategic initiatives with over 20 years of experience in California higher education, in academic affairs, student life, community engagement, and diversity and inclusion. Currently, she is the Vice Provost for Diversity Engagement and Community Outreach and an Associate Professor of Organizations, Communication, and Leadership at the University of San Francisco. On July 1st of this year, Mary will begin a new role as the inaugural Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Pacific, her alma mater. In 2014, Mary was appointed by Mayor Edwin M. Lee to serve San Francisco citizens as a library commissioner for the San Francisco Public Library. Mary was awarded the San Francisco Human Rights Commission's Hero Award and listed in Diversity MBA magazine's top 100 under 50 executive leaders. Prior to leading diversity and community initiatives at USF, Mary served as USF's Associate Vice President and Dean of Students, leading and supporting campus-wide student services, including behavioral intervention and crisis response. Prior to Jesuit Catholic education, she was the Dean of Student Affairs at Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles and the Assistant Dean of Students at the California State University in San Marcos, California. Mary is a member of the ISN Board of Directors, full disclosure, and she lives with her husband in San Francisco. Welcome, Mary.
Hello. It is so good to see you.
So good to see you. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. It's great to see you.
So what do you got? I got some beautiful dry California Sauvignon Blanc.
Wow. I have got a locally brewed, light, kind of a lighter Pilsner beer from a brewery here in Northeast Ohio that I'm enjoying. And they embraced the realities of the pandemic. They started doing home delivery, which was early on in the pandemic. That really, met people right where they were. Yeah. And so they caught my heart with that. So cheers, Mary.
Cheers, salud.
Salud. It's great to be with you tonight. Now, Mary, I read that bio, and that was there was a lot there. You have a long career with a lot of hard words to pronounce, but can you tell us that kind of gives the professional resume? But can you tell us how you got to where you are in terms of what you're doing today and right now in Catholic higher education, Jesuit higher education, but kind of moving into the Methodist world, back to your alma mater soon. How did you get there?
Wow. Well, I am a kid that grew up in church every single week, and Tuesday nights and Friday nights. I grew up in the Black church in California. My parents migrated to California in 1954, and me and my sisters were born here as first-generation Californians. They were part of the Great Migration, so they left the segregated communities of some parts of the Deep South and landed here in the early 50s. And my spiritual formation, even as a public school kid, but then having this 6 day of education that literally, I went to school 6 days a week, 5 days through California public education system. And then one day, with all these migrants who happen to be African Americans, who happen to be, the descendants of enslaved peoples who made their way from Mississippi and Louisiana and Texas and Arkansas and Georgia and all those places, and decided to be part of the Great Migration instead of going where you're at. There's thousands that came out west, and my folks were part of that group. That laid the foundation for me. It laid a foundation for me to be a part of this beautiful project, if you want to call it that, called the state of California, which has been kind of the place of possibility. My parents came here. They could have went north. Chicago is north. There's a lot of great manufacturing jobs were north, and they could have went to the northeast. A lot of thousands and thousands African Americans went there, but they decided to come out west because something about the West was all about possibility, right? And that has been kind of the frame in which my entire story is grounded, with this kind of Southern roots I have, but I'm not a Southerner. Kind of situated, being raised by people that kind of had a real deep understanding of the ways that society could say one thing but do something else. Meaning that, they understood the cognitive dissonance of the United States of America. They understood very deeply, that people would say something, but they would act a different way. They understood how that worked out in policies. And so, they understood interpersonal or personal kind of racism, but they had a very deep understanding of systemic and structural racism as Black identified people who were not afforded the same economic opportunities. My family had to save cash to be able to buy our family home because there was no mortgage lenders to Black families. You know, there's certain places that they had to live when they came to the Central Valley in California. And where did we live? We grew up in a neighborhood that was all migrants. And so you got Black migrants from the South that are leaving the segregated South. You had Mexican migrants from the state of Michoacan. And you have to remember, you know, the border crossed Mexico. They didn't cross the border. So many of them were actually returning to their homelands. We had just a community of a diaspora of folks from Asia. So I grew up with first generation children that had parents that were part of the internment camps or grandparents that were part of the internment camp experience. I grew up with Chinese Americans that were actually fourth or fifth generation Americans because they had been in the U.S. and they helped build the infrastructure of the country. The town I grew up was one of the largest communities of Filipino Americans outside of the Philippines. And then eventually it turned into one of the largest communities of Southeast Asians that were, historically they were so-called the boat people because the ways in which they came to the U.S. Shores, escaping the Cameroon at that time, from Vietnam, and then Cambodia, and Laos, with Laotian, Hmong. I just grew up as a kid, Chris, in this deeply multicultural community. It was multi-ethnic. It was multilingual. It was multicultural. It was many faiths and then we had the whole group of Europeans that had come, because of the agriculture. So you had the Portuguese, we had the Germans, we had a Greek community in the Central Valley. We had Italians love the land out here. They came in originally to New York, but they kept coming out west because of the grapes and everything that you can grow out here. I mean, lived in the California breadbasket. Everything grew out here. So you had all these Europeans that came that were farmers or connected to agriculture. And all of these communities were part of my upbringing. And I tell you that because that is so critical to understand me. It is also critical to understand how I do the work that I've been doing in higher education. I never thought I would, do diversity work in higher education. But now that you hear about my upbringing and how critical my formation, not only spiritually, but to be in community with all of these people and almost an interreligious kind of setting in a public school. I feel like in so many ways I was destined to do this work around helping us understand what does cultural pluralism mean today, and how do we take the tenets of cultural humility to create a more fair and more equitable society. I fell into it after I finished my undergraduate degree. I took my liberal arts degree, and where did I end up at? I ended up back in higher education. And then I ended up getting a master's degree, and I got a master's degree in what? Social justice education.
There you go.
And then I ended up in student affairs. Then I became a dean of students. And then I got introduced to Jesuit higher education somewhere about maybe my 14th or 15th year in higher ed.
How'd that happen?
I was in Los Angeles. So by that time I was in LA, and I was the dean of Otis College of Art and Design. Real great. It's like one of the fine institutes of fine arts. It had fashion design, but it was really the top art and design school in the city and county of Los Angeles. Okay. So great community of just artists and young people to work with. Having a great time there, overseeing all of their wellness, student life, everything.
Are you an artist? Was this a natural fit for you, or did you have to?
It was a natural fit, but you know what? I'm a performing artist, and and they didn't have a conservatory, but by my undergrad school, University of Pacific has one of the best conservatories in the West, and I was part of that.
That's a good advertisement. Make sure all our young musicians out there, please know that.
But anyways, Loyola Marymount, LMU was the sister school in the neighborhood, literally.
Okay.
Otis is Lincoln Boulevard. Anybody know anything about Playa del Rey and Playa Vista? I lived in those communities.
Okay.
So Otis was right here. LMU is right here. We're sister schools. And what do the good people at LMU do? They find out that there's a new dean in town that's working at the college, and the people at LMU invited me and my team over, and we had lunch together. We broke bread. We tried to find things that we could do between the schools. And in those interactions with my colleagues at Loyola Marymount, it was a colleague that said to me, she said, "You would be so good in Jesuit higher education." I said, "What do you mean, Barbara?" She was like the dean of students. She says, "You really get this whole thing about, the idea of education being this kind of ethical, moral opportunity," because I actually created a freshman year mandatory seminar for my art students that had to do with ethics and art, because I just felt it was important. And so when she found out that I was doing that kind of work in an art school, and she found out more about me, anyways, it was her prediction that I would end up in Jesuit higher education. And sure enough, at some point, the University of San Francisco opportunity came up, and that's how I firmly landed in Jesuit higher education in 2008. And the gift that the tradition provided me was that it helped me articulate how my spiritual formation and how that 6th day of education that I had for a number of years and growing up, how that related to the intellectual education that I got through my liberal arts school, and that I could bring those two things together in this thing that was called the Ignatian tradition, and that I had tools that I could to pull on, and that I could engage, like Ignatian pedagogy. What is that? And Ignatian spirituality. Right. What is that? And Ignatian reflection. So I became a student immediately, fast, deep. Anybody that knows me knows that I devoured everything I could read around Jesuit higher education, and I let it inform my work. And so 3 years into my work at USF, there was an opportunity for a new position that was created. It was the position that I occupy now.
Yeah. And, tell us a little bit about that. I think for folks maybe who are are veterans of life, they may not be as familiar with kind of how the student affairs side, especially of higher education, has evolved over time. So tell us about your role, and what does that look like on a 30,000 foot level, and then what happens day to day? Like, what is a normal day? Because I'm sure they're all normal.
Are you talking about my student affairs role or my diversity, equity, and inclusion role?
Well, I was going to jump into the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, but if you want to take us there, that's all right.
No, well, student affairs is, still a critical leadership role on our campuses, right? Every parent, grandparent, loved one wants to make sure that their student is cared for, so I took all of those skills that I had learned about how to build community from those years of being a dean of students. And when I was appointed by Father Stephen Prevet and Jennifer Turpin, who was the provost at the time, to take on this new leadership role to be the university's chief diversity officer, part of the work that I knew is that I had to be able to leverage that community building lessons that I had learned out of student affairs. And you have to remember, student affairs people get along with everybody and they work with everyone. Right. So I had that going for me as well, that I understood fundamentally how the campus worked. I know how to get things done, and I knew how to move things from idea to fruition. So my student life days had taught me really well. But the things, though, I didn't expect, which I would come to learn, is that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is much more than people think. They think it's just, these ideas of, if we all just love one another, and if we all just kind of like put our arms around one another, and, and if we kind of have these good thoughts that somehow or another things will be better. And why on earth would we dedicate an entire university position and then ask other people to support this role for the purposes of helping people to love one another? Part of the work was to help people to begin to build what I call a critical consciousness, to understanding that the institutions that we're part of are just a microcosm of the society in which we live in. And so if you turn on the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock news, or if you turn on your Twitter feed and you start to hear of the news of the day, you're going to hear about all the ways in which we as human beings do not create, equal and fair outcomes for one another. Now, we may sometimes focus on the individual and think if that individual can just be, remedied, or, what's the word when they have people that and that are incarceration? They try to, rehabilitated, that all these problems have to do with the individuals and their families, and perhaps, they didn't have what is right. When you really begin to look at issues, it's not really a few bad apples or individuals who are behaving poorly or saying things that are hurtful to others, but it's actually the systems itself, it's the institution itself that creates the environment. And so what I ended up discovering was that my work was to help my institution bear witness to the ways in which it creates the disparities and disproportionalities that it says it seeks to not have or seeks to, ameliorate. And to do it in a religious institutional context, which actually I think is more difficult than a public school context, because the public school context, you don't have the mission that has, and everybody has an ethical mission, all the great public schools do, but they really don't talk a lot about the moral imperative. The religious schools talk about the moral imperative, and that is good to do the work. So there's a positive. The shadow side of doing the work at a religious institution is that people who are affiliated with religious institutions oftentimes associate themselves with the institution mission itself. So what I'm saying is that it's harder, in my estimation and in my professional opinion, for people who work in religious institutions to see their institutional sin. It's harder for people that believe in these ideas around these moral imperatives to situate themselves in any of what Brian Massengale talks about, these kind of soul sickness, if they don't see themselves in the behaviors of people that they think that do those bad things, because they're like, I don't behave like that, so that's not me. And so what we end up doing is that we problematize individuals or groups of individuals. We say that, well, if only we do this for those African-American students, or if we only do this for these undocumented students, or if we only do that for this group of faculty of color, what have you, when actually those individuals are not the problem at all, and the problems do not lie within them at all. The problems that we seek to ameliorate has to do with the very core of the institution itself. So you ask me, what do I do every day? Every day I sit down and have conversation with anybody that'll have a conversation with me to help them think about their searches. There's faculty searches that are going on right now. So what do I do? I do a presentation that I've put together for them that's called Equitable Searches faculty searches in the Ignatian tradition. And then what do? I talk about the principle of equity. I talk about what does it mean to be equity-minded in a search process and what the best practices are. Then I bring in the tradition of our institution, and whose voice do I put next? I put Father Sosa's voice next, where he talks about the universal apostolic preferences. And then I take these principles of equity, which are that you must do more for the most for those who need it the most. So these principles of equity, and equity is a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching institutional reform for the purposes of closing disparities and disproportionalities. And then I overlay it with the universal apostolic preferences, which says that our work is a ministry of reconciliation and justice. And then I say, oh, by the way, this search process at the end of the day is your ministry of reconciliation and justice. So if you're thinking about bringing in this new tenured track full-time faculty who will probably be with us for the next 25 or 30 years, and they're going to impact the campus community. And if you look at the data, and I always show them data, this is what your profession looks like. This is what the students look like. I show them how far off we are. I show them the racial equity data. And generally, you'll see that the white faculty is far more overrepresented than the actual students. Then I leave it to them, saying that you have now both a duty and an obligation to steward these universal apostolic preferences for the purposes of being committed to these ideals of racial equity. That's what I do. I do it, and I do it over and over and over and over and over and over again with students, with faculty, with staff, with trustees, with alumni, with whomever, just to continue to elevate consciousness and to try to meet people where they're at. And hopefully after some time, they will have moved further along.
Yeah. I want to ask you some more about that. But before we do that, I just want to, there's a bunch of folks who've joined us. I want to make sure we welcome them. So let's see. We've got Lupe says, hello from the Marino Lay Missioners. Today I learned about the role self-awareness and mindfulness play in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And Julie says, hello from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Julie. Sarah says, hello from Canisius.
Oh, Sarah, Canisius had me there on campus just a few weeks ago. We were talking about eliminating anti-Blackness in Jesuit higher education. It was a great group. Thank you so much, my colleague, Sarah. Sarah also wrote a beautiful prayer for allies to work against whiteness in Jesuit higher education. You should get that and post it on ISN.
Yeah, thank you. And Andrea says, Andrea Heller-Bramson says hello from Bluffton, South Carolina. Andrea's a fellow board member.
Yes.
So welcome,
hi,
Andrea. Good to have you. And Heidi says, watching with St. Mark Young Adult Ministry from Venice, California, right down the hill from Otis and LMU.
I know exactly. I know exactly where you're at, Heidi. Shout out.
Excellent. And Hannah says, Hannah says, watching from Richmond, Virginia. There we go. Welcome. Terry says, Terry Mayon from LMU. Welcome, Terry. Great to have us. Brendan is joining us from Baltimore. Welcome, Brendan. Paula, says hello from Bon Secours Volunteer Ministry in Baltimore, Maryland. So thanks to everyone for joining us here tonight. Mary, can you used you talked about the idea of equity, and I think that in our society, the term equity or racial equity gets misunderstood in the mix of other similarly sounding terms. Can you talk about what your definition of equity, racial equity, is for folks listening tonight?
Thank you so much. So, as school children, and it doesn't matter whether we went to a public or private school, we have these understandings of equality, and we see it in the founding documents of our nation. So as children, as we are learning these principles of fairness, we were introduced to the idea of equality, and equality is important. It is as important as it ever has been. You know, we have gender inequality, particularly around the wages, and a lot of inequalities in life. The idea of equity is different from equality, because equality is seeking to make parity, you know, so to do the same. And so if I have two children and I want to give them equal dinners, I want to make sure that this child has, you know, this particular amount of vegetables, and this child has the same amount. Or if there's slices of pizza, I want to make sure that this child has a couple and this child has a couple. It's this idea of parity, and as I said before, it's critically important in the appropriate context. What equity does is that equity is dealing with the principle of fairness. Now, depending upon those two children that I just said, and I don't want to put this necessarily in the context of children, because I don't want it to come off as patronizing or parental in any way, because these principles are not in that way. But this idea of doing more for those who need it the most is dealing with the ways in which we perhaps may not have given one particular child the nourishment that they needed. Perhaps they came from an environment where there was perhaps a food desert. Maybe the child has a medical or some other type of wellness needs. There could be whatever the issues are, that one child may need more vegetables or more food than another child does. The same thing happens in life. When you start to look at the ways in which you have had whole groups of people that have been legislated out of opportunity, and those legislations have compounding disadvantage. So you look at the wealth gap right now in the United States of America. The average Black African-American family compared to the average white family with the same educational level, the gap is deep and significant, and it continues to grow. Now, you might say, well, is that a cultural issue? Could it be that whole group of people don't know how to manage money or don't know how to make money? Actually, no, what it means is that you're going to look at the historical context of how money has been distributed in the United States. What's the number one thing that most families create wealth from? Owning a house, owning land.
Yeah.
You have to think that the entire United States was built upon the removal of a group of people, the indigenous people, and then the bringing in a whole nother group of people, the enslaved Africans, against their will, to build up the economy. And then the ways in which that economy grew left out groups of people, specific Black identified people, indigenous people, and other persons of color. And so throughout the entire legislation of the United States and all of our laws, that then it gets adopted to state laws, county laws, and municipalities, there is a built-in discrimination for all Black identified people that live in this country. And so when you start then looking at the wealth gap, you can then go state by state, federal legislation, you can start to see how that thing persists. You can do the exact same thing for education. You can do it for healthcare. You can do it at any life indicator at all. And so when you do racial equity work, what you're saying is that I'm going to pinpoint to close these gaps, but I'm going to look at it in the ways in which race is implicated in these disparities and disproportionalities. And if you try to do any equity work without looking at race, then you're not really going to move the needle. You can only move the needle when you have the courage to tell the truth and say that my institution, whether it's a bank or financial institution, whether it's a medical institution, whether it's an educational institution, whether it's a city, a municipality. We participated in all of these policies and legislation that created this particular outcome. So now we are going to remedy that, and we can only remedy that by doing some work around racial equity. And so that's one reason why you hear the Biden and Harris administration talk about racial equity. It's the first administration that I think in the history of the United States that has openly talked about the importance of racial equity work across all dimensionalities of government, because race is implicated not only in higher education, it's implicated in everything, Chris.
Sure. Yeah. And what an integral place to be, engaging in racial equity work, but, higher education, like the impact that, can be made, right?
Yeah.
Such a pivotal, not just for students, but, as you pointed out, your work is engaging with lots of different campus community members, from students all the way to members of the board of trustees and everyone in between. And it, I wonder how you have enough time in the day to be present to all those different constituencies within that campus. I want to talk a little bit more, but before we do it, I need to do a few announcements, and I also just want to say hi to a few other folks who have joined us. So we're going to say really quickly, welcome to Laura from Washington D.C. Thanks for being with us, Laura. Welcome to Andrea from Jesuit High School in Portland, Oregon. Welcome. Karen says, "Hi, neighbor." I'm not sure whose neighbor Karen is, but hey, Karen. Alex from University of Detroit Mercy says hello, and now Mary, we're gonna take a little break. So have a sip of wine, relax for a couple of seconds, just a few announcements, and we'll come right back to you. Okay, so I want to share some things going on with ISN and some ways you can connect with us. First, regular Solidarity on Tap viewers may have noticed that this week we are premiering our new logo, which is very exciting. We use some loud music at the beginning of the show to introduce it. We're so excited about this new logo that we put it on a pint glass. And now you can attend virtual Solidarity on Tap, or even relive your favorite in-person moments with your very own glass. Okay, so complete with a timely reminder from Pope Francis of our call to justice and solidarity. The pint glasses are union made in the United States. They are scheduled to start shipping the first week of, actually, I just heard today they're scheduled to start shipping the end of this week. So if you order now, it should get in the mail soon. And you can order right now. You can order today by going to igsol.net. That's igsol.net/store. We have lots of great other items out there for all of your social justice, faith and justice needs. So make sure to check that out. Secondly, tonight, we'd also like to invite you to take action with the Ignatian family. As vaccinations ramp up across the United States and other wealthy countries, low-income countries are being left behind. Solidarity with our brothers and sisters around the world demands that we do everything possible to enable rapid vaccination on a global level. Under World Trade Organization rules, monopoly rights are granted to the pharmaceutical companies who developed the vaccines. This means that other companies who can produce the same vaccines in other parts of the world are not permitted to do so, even though they have the capacity. There are a large group of low-income countries led by South Africa and India that have asked the WTO to grant an emergency waiver, which would allow the pharmaceutical companies to produce generic versions of these vaccines during the pandemic, and which would make them much more widely available. The U.S., along with several other countries, is blocking this waiver right now, and this will have continue to be a challenge for many countries and for many people across the world. So we hope you'll join us in solidarity with all those in need around the world tonight by sending a message to President Biden. We're asking him to change course and support this waiver in order to allow low-income countries to produce their own vaccines. So you can take action at the link on the screen, igsol.net/vaccine-access, or you can text vaccine, VACCINE, to 888-476-2004. Okay, and while you're doing that, let me tell you about our sponsors tonight for Solidarity on Tap. First is Mary Lay Missioners, who work internationally with those at the margins for a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world. And you can learn more about Mary Lay Missioners at their website, mklm.org. Secondly, the Center for Global Education and Experience at Augsburg University. They believe that education can create a more just and sustainable world, achieved by providing global immersive experiences in Latin America, Southern Africa, Palestine, and virtually, sharing the Jesuit vision of educating whole persons of solidarity. CGEE has worked with Boston College, Fordham University, and the University of San Francisco, among many others. Students who value social justice and solidarity will find a home studying migration in Mexico, the legacy of liberation theology in Central America, or decolonization in Southern Africa. Schedule a customized program for 2022 or apply for a future semester abroad at augsburg.edu/global. JVC Northwest, a year of service in the Pacific Northwest focused on the core values of community, simple living, social and ecological justice, and spirituality and reflection can all be brought to you by JVC Northwest. Their Jesuit volunteers live together in intentional community and serve in a variety of full-time roles at local partner organizations in Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. Are also eligible for an AmeriCorps Education Award. You can learn more about becoming a JV at jvcnorthwest.org/join. Make sure to check that out. And finally, the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities is pleased to sponsor tonight's Solidarity on Tap and to share a new resource for Jesuit colleges and universities. The resource is named Eyes to See, and it is an anti-racism examen designed for boards of trustees, administrators, faculty, and staff to learn how to make their institutions more anti-racist. A key virtual component of Eyes to See is a new video featuring voices and images from across the Jesuit network expressing their hopes for building more racially just cultures and communities. To learn more about Eyes to See and to view the video, please visit ajcunet.edu/eyes-to-c. Or if you just go to their homepage, you can find a link there as well. I know that for a fact. Now, we also invite you to join us for future Solidarity on Tap events in 2021. So keep an eye out for upcoming events at igsolnet/SOT, or visit our homepage at ignatiansolidarity.net. And if you liked our conversation this evening and want to share it or watch again, this and all our previous Solidarity on Tap videos are available at ignatiansolidarity.net, on our YouTube page, as well as on our Facebook page too. And if you enjoy Solidarity on Tap, please consider giving a gift to ISN to sustain our work throughout the year. You can do that at ignatiansolidarity.net/donate, or you can you can send a text message with the word donate to 888-476-2004. Again, that's donate at 888-476-2004, and make a donation via your phone. Also, I'm always supposed to remind you of this. We want you to share a picture of yourself watching or having a Zoom virtual watch party to your Instagram account and tag Ignatian Solidarity, plus use that hashtag ISN Live, and we can feature that photo in our next feature or story about Solidarity on Tap. Okay, so make sure to do that so that we can feature you. All right. Now, coming back real quick, we've got a couple questions that folks have asked. So I think we'll get to the questions that we've gotten from the crowd. So Brendan from Baltimore said, "I'd love to hear about some experiences you have had where you've witnessed growth. Have you noticed certain traits of school communities that do well with this work? As you said, truth-telling and courage are a key."
Brendan, I really love that question. I can tell you not whole school communities, but what I call micro communities within a community. That is more of what actually happens, and meaning that all leadership is local, right? They've always said that, not just like local in cities, but even local in institutions, schools and colleges and universities. And so you can have one division where you see a kind of a generosity of learning happening, where people are anxious to learn and grow in their awareness, and they begin to have a sense of accountability within one another. And accountability is when one knows that just because one is unaware, that doesn't mean that you get to be off the hook because your unawareness leads to harm of someone else. So people that help each other, they understand that, and that's kind of the culture of a place. When I assess that happening, I can always go back to the leader. I can just see who the leader is, what he, she, or they have done, how they have distributed their equity inclusion work. So whoever their direct reports are doing the work themselves. And then you start to see clearly within their teams, their direct reports, that there is a body of evidence in the types of sessions and trainings and things that they do. But I see more microcultures, meaning that I haven't quite witnessed an institution that has really done this work all the way through yet, because of the decentralized nature of sometimes colleges and universities can be. And colleges and universities don't hold their senior leaders accountable the ways that they could hold them accountable if you really want to do the work of racial and social justice. And racial and social equity work in the ways in which it needs to be done now. We've never had that type of accountability before. So there's great examples of it, Brendan, but that has to do with great leaders. And then it's usually within certain parts of institutions.
Thanks for that, Mary. And I think Karen has a question I think goes right along with Brendan's question. Just how do you remain patient with the slow pace of institutional change, which I think you just described, that your experience has been that institutions haven't quite changed yet. So we have to be really patient because we're not even close. But and Karen references how you talked about giving the same presentation, again and again and again. This is long work, and we can look through our country's history. We can look through our church's history. We can even look through Jesuit education's history and say, yeah, we've changed a little bit, but we still have a long way to go. How do you remain patient?
Well, there's a couple things. I appreciate that question very much. It is the long game. And I'll tell you something I told a group of, it's a small group of white identified faculty and staff. I told them, I said, you're going to be, at least at this particular institution, I said, you're going to be the last group that I get to do this reflecting on whiteness work with at the University of San Francisco. And they began at mid of the semester, and they'll continue through the end. And what it is this kind of structured way in which they kind of do some white identity development work. And my team members are leading them through it. So I come at the beginning, I kind of give them a charge, and I'll come at the end. Julia Dowd, who had been the director of university ministry at USF, was brilliant at this work, and her and I were partners at doing what we call reflecting on whiteness, where I would use her as my transformative ally to help other white identified faculty and staff to unpack this work. And what I told my colleagues was that some of you are 25, the younger ones in the group. I said, some of you are 40, and there's some people I know are over 50 in this group. I said, however old you are, it's going to take that amount of time for you to really begin to dislodge the ways in which white supremacy has malformed you. And I said that word right. We talk about formation processes. Well, white supremacy has malformed millions of people in the United States. And white identified people have the worst degree of being malformed. And so it takes a lot of interior work to unpack that. It's not going to be one book. I told them, I said, it's not going to be, any check off list. There's a beginning and end date to this. It's not going to be that. And I said, I want to tell you as your sister in faith and in this work, I'm asking you to commit to the lifelong work. I said, because I've committed to the lifelong work of helping institutions do this. So I want to hear good things only from you, even as I move on and transition out, because I know I can depend upon you to do this work, and not to get guilt-ridden about it and fragile about it, and think that, you can't do it no longer. I said, because think about not only the babies at the borders, think about all the overrepresentation in the incarceration system of Black and brown young people and men and women. I said, think about the ways in which my ancestors have carried this work. And I continue to carry it. And my daughters have inherited this work, and they didn't ask for it. They didn't ask to be born Black. They love being Black, but they didn't ask for all this stuff that our white colleagues haven't worked out. So I do a lot of that type. I talk to people that way, and then I believe that the ones that God has taken the scales off their eyes and their ability to hear, I believe that they hear me, and I believe that they're answering the call. Because if I didn't believe that, I couldn't do this work. The other thing that I do, so that's one strategy. The other strategy is this. I work through young people who will not have their humanity negotiated. They will not do what my generation and some other generations had to do, try to navigate and negotiate white spaces. Try to figure out. There's a young freshman woman right now that I just had met with. She's one of our senators. This young woman is just going to be fabulous, whatever she's going to do. But anyways, she's multiplied. There's young women of color like her, young Latina, that will not negotiate their humanity. And so my other strategy, so that's a strategy with adults, with my white colleagues. My other strategy is to set the young people on fire, to coach them and to counsel them, and to help them navigate and negotiate these institutions so that they will not let the institutions off easy. I said, that's your job. I said, you got me in the administration doing my work, but you cannot let the institution off easy. I said, there is a history all going back to the freedom schools of the 1960s. What did they do? They got these young Black young people in these schools. They were not even, schools. They were like, basements of churches, living rooms of houses, to teach them what they needed to know, the nonviolent tactics, how to disrupt the status quo. So then they were prepared. So in many ways, I feel like I'm continuing the freedom schools, but I'm doing it in an institutional platform, helping them, young people specifically, who are equipped and will be the change agents. So it's a kind of a dual strategy. And then the last piece is that I always hold leadership accountable. I just say that if you want to have anything like president or vice president or dean or all these titles or director, I said, if you're not doing anything for this work, then you're occupying space and you're part of the problem. And so sometimes that goes over well, and oftentimes it doesn't. So it's all three of those things together, calling in the allies, telling them that you have what you need. God has given you what you need, but stay the course. I trust that you'll stay the course. Work with young people that will be more brilliant than I ever was, but young people have always been at the forefront of liberation. They've always been clear about what righteousness is, something that God puts in the hearts of young people that helps us and institutions do better. So work with them. And then for all the baby boomers that are holding these key leadership roles, to keep calling them out and say that you got to do better. If you're occupying all the leadership right now, overwhelmingly, white people are occupying all the leadership in the United States. You have a duty and a responsibility. And you can't just keep pulling down those big salaries and having all of that privilege that you've had all your life and not use your institutional actor role for good. And if you choose not to do it, then shame on you. Because that means there's going to be a story about everyone that's in leadership. There's a story that people are going to say about you. And when they leave, and if they have not done the work of racial justice, and they've been in a key institutional role, they've led a school, they led a college, whatever it is, and they haven't done that work, and they didn't take those issues on, then that's also going to be part of their story as well. And so I'm trying to convince people, be on the right side of the history. Do the racial justice work in your school. Take a little bit of political, use your political capital for good. Take some flack from some older alumni. They're not going to kick you out of their job. Use your social capital for this moment and in the way that only you can.
Thanks, Mary. That was a great response. I really appreciate you being very blunt in calling people in leadership positions to be accountable. I think that's so important. It's so challenging to say. So thank you for that. Mary, we just have about a minute left, and we often ask our guests on Solidarity on Tap to we talk about the idea of this gathering as a space where we always have a hope-filled future in our minds. So I'd just be curious for something. I love the sun in the back. That's a great sign.
I know the sun's going down in the west. It's just a little bit. It's almost down.
It's right in your eyes, though, too. What's something that gives you hope, Mary?
Oh, what gives me hope is that I think that God gives us a spirit of freedom. And I think that spirit of freedom is within each one of us. And the work of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly with schools that have religious affiliations, like Jesuit institutions and other religious institutions, Catholic institutions, is that we are seeking freedom through our educational processes. And so what gives me hope is that there's going to be a lot of people who answer that call for freedom. Because as Audre Lorde said, that my freedom is a tie to your freedom, right? To the least of these, how we treat the least of these is how our Father will see us, depending on your religious and faith background, whether you're part of one of the Abrahamic traditions or another religious or faith tradition or none at all. But I do believe that deep within all of us, we all have a need for freedom, freedom to be seen, to be heard, to know that we matter, to know that that we count, to know that our lives were not in vain. Everyone has that need. Every human being. I think God has put that in our hearts. And I think that this diversity, equity, inclusion work is just one way to help us be able to find that liberation for others. So then we also by liberating others, we thereby liberate ourselves. That gives me hope. This is a ministry of liberation. DEI work is all about liberation.
Yes, it is. Mary, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was wonderful.
And thank you so much.
I'm grateful for your leadership, for your contributions to the Ignatian family through your work at USF, as well as your role as a member of the board of directors of the Ignatian Solidarity Network. And thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you can join us next time. And remember, These conversations are always available. You can go back and watch this entire session on our YouTube page or at ignatiansolidarity.net. Thank you to everyone and have a great night.
Thank you.